Hello, everyone. Welcome to Censored to Celebrated. My name is Melita Noël Cantú, and I am so excited to be doing a final wrap-up show for 2014. I have guest art therapist DeAnn Acton with me today, and here she is. Hi, DeAnn.
Hi.
Welcome. I'm
Welcome.
so excited to have you here, and I'm glad we got to fit this in December. I know it's such a busy time of year. But it just seemed important since Censored to Celebrated was born in the year of 2014. I really wanted to wrap it up with a creative spark, and DeAnn's really bringing that to us today with her inspiration and creativity. And I also just wanted to end, I know last time we met was in November, and we were talking about the Transgender Day of Remembrance, which is a really hard time of year. So I wanted to end on a little bit more of the celebratory part of my work here and the exploration we do with the alphabet soup of sexuality and gender. So I have some questions for DeAnn, but first I want to go ahead and introduce her, and I also want to just make sure that everyone here knows that as we all know, it can be a challenge to talk about sexuality and gender. It can be a life or death issue, as we talked about last month with the Transgender Day of Remembrance, and even now, every day I'm hearing about more suicides and deaths because of fear and hatred around these topics. So I just want to be really mindful about that this is a topic that people self-censor about. This is a topic that culturally we censor around, and we're here to celebrate as well, and I want to honor that, but I also want to remember that it can be a challenge to do that, and to really honor that DeAnn is here to share that with us and inspire us with her own example. So with all that being said, okay, DeAnn, I'm going to put this on you while I talk about you.
Okay.
So DeAnn has her Bachelor's of Fine Arts degree from the University of Texas, and you got that in the early 90s, and it sounds like you were a working artist for a while, and then you realized that it's not always the most lucrative thing to be doing, and so you had heard about art therapy, and you went back to get your degree for that at Notre Dame de Namur University in the Bay Area in the late 90s.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where you got your MFT, or your marriage, family therapy, and art therapy degree. Is that what all the letters stand for?
Yes, licensed marriage family therapist, and I'm also a board certified art therapist.
Right, great, okay. So, and I know you've worked with a whole variety of populations and people working, and you've used art as kind of the central tool for all of your work, both around the diversity of sexuality and gender, as well as just all that makes us human. And so I know you had been up in California, and you've recently moved to Austin, Texas, where you are working with the private practice Art Therapy Austin, and you're there in your office, which is beautiful. And I see some of your artwork behind you and your cranes and all that. So hopefully we'll get to talk a little bit about all that. And yeah, I'm just really excited to learn more about how you use art in the world, both with your clients and personally, as a way of moving from censorship to celebration, and kind of what inspiration you can bring to us today as we wrap up 2014 and move into 2015. So welcome again. It's so thrilling to have you here. And without further ado, I just want to let folks know that you can make comments I have the comment tracker on. I got it to work today, so I'm very excited. I will start us off by showing you something really super fancy. Here is a quote that inspires DeAnn, and I'm going to share this with everyone. And we're going to make sure that it can actually be seen. So this is an author, right? Haruki Murakami, is that correct?
Yes.
Who did this quote? And it's a wonderful quote. He says, once the storm is over, you won't remember how you made it through, how you managed to survive. You won't even be sure whether the storm is really over. But one thing is certain: when you come out of the storm, you won't be the same person who walked in. That's what this storm is all about. And this is, like I said, Haruki Murakami, and I have it there on the website, on the comment tracker as well. So as you can see, I can put comments up. So if you have something you'd like to ask DeAnn, please feel free. If we have time, we will do that. Otherwise, we'll be sure to answer questions afterwards. DeAnn, let's start out with a question that for me is compelling, and I've really been exploring it, especially since starting this webcast from Censored to Celebrated, and that is, what is the alphabet soup of diverse sexuality and gender? You know, we talk about the LGBT, and I'm curious, what has been most relevant in your work, and is it still relevant, or do you see it changing?
I think it's been really hard, because I think that although for a long time I was using LGBTQ, the Q being queer, to be more inclusive, but I still feel like it's not really as inclusive as I want it to be, because there's still so many populations that are kind of left out of that. I really like more of the notion of diverse sexuality and gender, because I feel like it more is more inclusive. But it's hard with all labels, you know, and I think that it really depends upon the person that you're speaking with, what they want, you know. I think just the same as with culture. Like, for example, I'm Mexican American, and you know, I don't necessarily like the word Hispanic, but my mother does. You know, I like the word Chicano, and my mother doesn't like that word. So we all have differences around how we want to call ourselves and what we want to label ourselves. And I think it's really important to give the population the ability to do that for themselves. You know, and so I think it's kind of an interesting idea about the alphabet. And how do we include everybody? And it just seems like it's just going to get longer and longer and longer. So I like the idea of just like trying to figure out a way to make it just, you know, diverse sexuality and gender, to be just more encompassing and celebratory of everybody that might include.
Yes, and it's especially interesting that I've had some conversations recently that this term, diverse sexuality and gender, may not include intersex, because that is a chromosomal, biological aspect to being a human being, and so it's not an identity or an orientation in the same way that we think about gender identity and sexual orientation. So the person I was having this conversation with, and I would love to have them on the show here, was talking about, you know, we're all just people. When are we going to just be able to use the word people? Why do we have to keep using, kind of parsing around these terms? And it's really true. There's a lot to be said for using words that make sense for a person, but at some point it breaks down to we're all people here, and so how do we talk about each other and talk with each other in ways that make sense, but also do more to connect us rather than separate us.
Right. Yeah. I think it's a very fine line, because there's also the piece where you want to have pride in who you are, and you know, and so I think that there's, you know, the idea that we're all people is nice, but you know, I also like the idea that I'm who I am and all the parts of my identity and what that may entail.
Right.
And so I think that, you know, it's hard to find room for both of those things, you know, and understand that, you know, when I have a client that comes in my office, all of those things make a big difference. They're not just people, but they're like all of those ways in which they identify themselves really are an important part of what they bring into the office to see me, you know.
Right. No, and that makes a lot of sense, because I mean there are ways that, of course, we have differences, and how do we explore those? So let's get into some of that. That's a great segue to, if you could tell me a little bit about just what does it mean to be an art therapist? How did you walk this path to get here from being an artist? And I know you're still a practicing artist, but how did you really decide that you wanted to use this tool in a therapeutic way?
Well, for me, issues of social justice have always been extremely important. From, you know, when the time I was very little, I was very much interested in issues of equality and what seemed fair and what didn't seem fair. And I carried that with me throughout my adulthood. And so when someone told me that you could actually use art to help people, I was like, whoa, that's so cool. And it also made a lot of sense, because I've been doing that all my life. You know, it's always been, my art's been very personal, and it's been about whatever I've been struggling with, which is one of the things that made it very difficult for me to sell art, because, you know, I was like, oh, but this piece is about my, you know, struggle with whatever. I don't want to sell this to anybody.
You got connected to it, yeah.
I know. And so I think that for me, art therapy just was a really natural fit as a way of being able to do that. And I love the idea of sitting with someone and helping them to be expressive. Because I think there's a way in which children know intrinsically that they just need to create. And when they're creating, they're happy. But as adults, somehow we forget that, and we stop creating. And I'll have someone in my office, and they'll be picking up a piece of clay, and they'll be playing with it. And you can just see their whole being kind of changes in the office. And it feels like they really are going to a different place. And it
sounds very transformative.
It is. It's really important work to be able to watch, you know. I also love the art therapy, because not only is it a way of being able to be expressive of self, and especially when you talk about populations where the dominant culture is really telling you not to express who you are, that really art is all about self-expression, and that everything you do in here, and one of the things I say from the moment someone picks up a marker or a crayon or a pastel or a piece of clay is that everything you do will be perfect, because it comes from you, and it's who you are. And I think that that's a message that people don't get in the world at large. And so I think it's a really important and powerful message to get, that no matter what you do, it's going to be perfect, because it's who you're supposed to be, you know. So I love that part about art. And the other thing I really like about it is it makes kind of a record of what you do. So, you know, someone can like talk in therapy about something, and you can maybe have something important that happens, and then you leave the office, and like, you know, a couple of days later, it's like, something happened, I don't remember what it was, but something important happened. But with the art, you have an actual record of what happened. You know, you have this piece that reminds you of something. And so that's something that's also really powerful about art.
Wow.
There's also, the last thing that I think is important is just the way in which art impacts issues of trauma, because oftentimes we carry around trauma in our bodies. It's not always someplace where we have easy access to it verbally. And so oftentimes with talk therapists, they want to discuss the way things you're feeling about stuff or whatever, but some of that is not really available to you. But through the art, you are more able to kind of access that information, especially when a lot of things happen pre-verbal. And a lot of times issues of identity are happening from the time you're very little, you're getting all these messages. And so I think that art has this really neat way of being able to kind of circumvent that.
Well, and that leads into, I want to get into that a little bit more, is tell me how, especially with the pre-verbal, kind of how long do you see that period being, and what kinds of things do you see being accessed around gender, around sexuality, around trauma, that is pre-verbal? Tell us, unpack that a little bit for us.
Well,
I think that's really interesting.
A lot of stuff is pre-verbal. Even as adults, things can be kind of not pre-verbal, but non-verbal. Like, for example, so something traumatic happens to you, and your brain has a very interesting way of kind of dealing with trauma. We go into this place of fight or flight, which everybody knows about. But what we don't really recognize is what that means is that our prefrontal cortex, the part of our brain that has judgment and tells us right from wrong or what kind of choices we should make or whatever, that part of our brain kind of goes offline to give us more energy to kind of be able to deal with whatever the trauma is. So that's one piece that happens. And the other thing that happens is that your brain does this interesting thing in that the way that it stores the memory afterwards is not so nice and neatly stored like a regular memory is. And so because of that, we get triggered.
Because you're in that fight or flight place. Is that correct?
Right.
Okay.
And so we get triggered by things. And we sometimes don't even know that we're triggered. We're just all of a sudden like, wow, how did I react to that way? I mean, all of a sudden I became this, like, you know, not who I thought I was going to be. I wasn't rational in that moment or whatever. Right. And it's because we've become triggered. And people who have more trauma are more triggered. Because the amygdala, the part of the brain that decides whether or not something is scary, becomes kind of larger and almost willful. And can take over. And so it's really important to be able to do kinesthetic things in order to kind of help that process so that you're not so much like forced into making, you know, just kind of reflexive type of things that happen just due to trauma. So for example, you know, mindfulness is a really important piece of that. Meditation can be really important. Drumming is actually really neat. Art therapy, because we're actually using clay and we're using our hands, and it's more than just verbal, you know. You're able to access more of that information that's stored kind of all over the place in the brain. So, you know, art has a really neat way of being able to help us to be able to kind of work through trauma in a very different way than just regular verbal therapy does. And when you think about when it comes to issues of gender and sexuality, especially when you feel like, you know, mainstream society, your family, or whoever has had this way of really oppressing you, that is definitely trauma in the body. And so I think that there's ways in which, you know, art has this really useful way of getting in there and being able to kind of work through those issues in a very different way than, again, talk therapy does.
Right. So you're seeing trauma kind of manifesting in this way in someone's body. It's like a pressure from outside, and it's created trauma in the person's body. And you see that coming out, especially around things like gender and sexuality, when there's been repression. It's almost like this censorship from the family structure or the kind of community around that person.
And the culture itself, right? The culture can be incredibly toxic, you know, to many people. And so I think that there's a way in which this can be helpful, you know, to restructure the brain so that you're more able to kind of go through life and, you know, make decisions not based solely on fear. And that fear is very much founded and important to recognize and validate because it's true. It comes from real experience. And at the same time, we want to be able to find ways to kind of be in the world and be comfortable with who we are and put away all those negative messages that really aren't ours to carry around.
So let's get into that. Let's get into what are some strategies that you would recommend or projects you're working on that you think are really exciting, that are helping you wrap up 2014 and moving into 2015, and things that you might want to suggest for others to contemplate and think about as everyone's wrapping their year up.
Sure. So let's see here. The things that I'm doing for myself, because I noticed for myself is that when I'm making art, I'm happy, and when I'm not making art, I'm definitely not quite as happy. And I find that anxiety takes over and all these other things. And so for me, art making is definitely, it's like going to the doctor for me. It really is a part of my my health. And so right now I'm doing I challenged myself with 365 paintings for the next year. I started on December 1st, and it's been pretty intense, but it's been really fun. And so every night I do a painting. And it's nice too because it gets me off of social media and doing all the other stuff and really like just kind of paying attention to myself for a little while, which is good. So I'm doing that. I also
I've been seeing some of that, and I know that you have been posting it and writing about some of the different pieces and what they mean to you. Is that something that you could share here with us, and so that other people could look at your blog?
Sure. It's great. We can put it under the comments, but it's 365paintings.weebly.com.
.weebly. Okay. So 365paintings.weebly.com.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's been really fun.
Yeah, that sounds like a great project, and it's a great way. It sounds like you're practicing mindfulness as well by doing that, because you're very much saying, I need to set aside doing that social media that I just, I know a lot of us get caught in every night, and do something that's really about getting into the flow and getting out of your head and into your body.
Yeah, definitely. Another thing that I like to do every New Year's is me and my husband, we do this thing with a rock, or just even just talking to each other. And we will sit together and we'll pretend like it's actually New Year's 2015 coming into 2016.
Okay, so you kind of project a year ahead.
We're projecting a year ahead, and I do this with my clients too. With my clients, I give them a rock and I have them pretend like it's New Year's the following year. And then I interview them around like what happened this year. Tell me about the things that you did this year. And so it's almost like a visualization of like what are all the cool things that I want to manifest for the year, and pretending like that I have done them, and I'm happy, and I'm feeling content, and I'm feeling good about the way that I'm going into the year.
Okay.
Yeah, and with my clients, I'll give them a rock, and I'll have them like maybe paint an image on the rock so that they can have something to carry with them. Again, that transition, that little object that they can carry with them to kind of remind them of what we discussed. The other thing that's really fun to do is a vision board. I love doing vision boards where I make a big board and I put all the images of all the things that interest me and that I want for the year. And especially doing it as a family, where I have the kids put things on there and everybody's like including stuff. I think that can be a really fun family ritual that we do. Yeah.
Do you have any examples of the vision boards? I've done vision boards, but I've never thought to do them as a family or collectively with a group of friends or anything. It's might be a neat party idea even.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, definitely. I used to do kind of like vision board type of things, big collages with some of the students that I worked with. And we would make like huge images. I would outline a huge person, and we'd fill it up with just images of like, what it means to be a girl or a boy or whatever that meant. And it was so much fun because they would put on one layer of what the culture wanted it to mean, and then they put on another letter of what they thought it should mean. And there were always these amazing images, of like just all these different types of things, and it was just so much more inclusive and really exciting. And I remember we made one that was like 8 feet tall, and we hung it in the classroom where some of the kids that I worked with were, and it was just very nice to have this big character there that really was representative of this idea that of just inclusivity.
Right. And what how old were the people, the students you were working with when you?
They were teenagers.
Teenagers. Okay.
Yeah.
So I imagine you could probably do that with elementary school.
Yeah, definitely.
It seems like applicable kind of across the board. Oh.
Yeah, and you can even do a vision board online too. You can use Pinterest and do like a vision board. Call it your vision board and go around the internet collecting images of things that you think or you want for the year, and put them all there so you have a place to.
That's a great idea. I've become a big user on Pinterest, so I think I might try that one. I love making physical boards, but then it becomes an issue of where do I put them? I mean, my partner is an artist, so we have very it's a premium to have some wall space in this house and in our space. So I like the idea of the virtual one for those of us who are Pinterest lovers. So
Yes,
very
yeah.
cool. So
Yeah.
tell me. So I feel like we've heard about 4 different strategies. Any other kind of creative ideas that you think
Fingers.
are really useful and juicy
Um,
around
yeah.
sexuality and gender?
Hmm. Another one, some of the things that I've done with some of the trans youth that I've worked with is an activity called an inside-outside box, where you have a box, and on the outside we put images of what dominant culture sees when they see you, you know, and
Mm-hmm.
what that looks like. But on the inside of the box, you put what people maybe don't know about you, or what they don't see about you, or and those can be really neat ways of kind of starting a conversation with someone around issues of identity. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I also love art because there's ways in which you can really speak to the continuum of diversity.
Mm-hmm.
And so, you know, one thing that's really fun to do is like having someone choose 2 colors that are like one for the dominant culture's idea of female, one color for the dominant culture's idea of male, and then like, you know, okay, let's mix these colors together, and how much of this would you put in, and how much of this color would you put in to be you, you know?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
How do you fit in on there? You know, I think that that's kind of a neat thing to do too.
Oh, interesting. I've heard people doing that around their orientation of like today
Mhm.
I'm 20% into boys and 80% into girls, or and
Yeah.
I've heard it done kind of
Uh-huh.
mathematically speaking, but never with color. That's
Yeah.
a really neat
Yeah, I
idea.
like the idea of like, you know, making some quantitative like analysis of identity. Maybe that's a mathematician in me that likes
Yeah,
that. Yeah.
right, right, right. Well, and it can change so infinitesimally, when you do it
Right.
with color, you can really do that
Hmm.
gradation. But
Yeah.
with math, you can certainly do it
Yeah,
too.
and it's really fun too when you
Specific.
do it with color with like a group. And so then after that, after you all have your color of who you are, and then creating some like mural with all those colors together. You know, it's just
Oh, yeah. Oh, that sounds
really
amazing.
celebrating all the diversity that's available within your particular group. You know.
So I can really see how you use this both kind of individually with someone, but then in a group settings. I mean, it sounds like
Hmm.
you can apply a lot of these different strategies and
Yeah.
creative tools to working with groups.
Yeah, I really am. I'm quite a lover of groups. I think
Mm-hmm.
community is such an important thing to have, you know. And when you find, especially when you can find a group of people that have experienced the same types of things that you have, I mean, there's nothing more powerful than that. I think that, you know, I used to always tell my clients for years, you know, oh, you should try a group. Group therapy is really wonderful. And I think that it wasn't until I had my own experience with a group when I was fought cancer that I really understood what that meant. To
Yeah.
have
Hmm.
somebody there where I didn't have to like explain everything, that they understood where I was going through. They didn't look at me strange or
Right.
with sad puppy dog eyes or whatever the thing was.
Right. Right.
And I really could just express myself. There was something just so powerful about that. So, you know, I recommend groups to everybody. And creative groups where you're able to do art is even more powerful. I just think it's just really a fun way of being able to kind of be together and create community very quickly
Yes.
with others. So.
Well, tell me, I know at Art Therapy Austin, you all are putting together some groups. Can you tell me a little bit about what those are about and what they look like?
Yeah, I'm starting I'm hoping in January to begin a women's group. But you know, I think that we want to do more groups with especially youth. I think there's going to be an adolescent group that will be starting pretty soon. And I think that we also wanted to start doing some kids groups that are art therapy, but also social skills type groups
Yeah.
for youth. So I think those are some of the groups that we're thinking about. We also have workshops just ongoing. We have felting workshops to learn how to do felting, which is such a neat art experience because of the way that you do felting. There's a rhythm to it that can become very meditative in a way. And it takes a
Okay.
lot of mindfulness. I think that it's a really nice skill to have. They
Yeah,
actually have
and
done a
it's
lot
and
of,
it seems like a way of making art that not a lot of people are familiar with, so it's kind
yeah,
of
yeah,
a
yeah.
something different too. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
it's really
very
fun.
physical for the winter months, I imagine. It's really nice.
Right. Yeah, and so we're going to probably be doing workshops every month of one kind or another. So please just check out our website and kind of see the calendar and see what we're going to be up
Great.
to. But we're hoping for lots of cool stuff this year. We're
Yeah.
going to be having an open house on the 24th, I believe,
Okay.
from 4 to 6. And
Great.
there's more on our website about that.
So
So that's
open
really
in the Austin community here. Great.
yes,
Well,
yes, Austin.
as
Yeah.
a person who's part of that Austin community, I'm certainly and a parent, I'm very excited
And
about
we'll make some
a lot
art
of that.
too. We'll
Yeah.
definitely make some art while we're
Yeah.
there. So.
That's exciting. I tend to think of myself as more of a musical person, and and communication is very important to me. But I find myself more and more drawn to visual stuff, and
Mhm.
I was surprised at how therapeutic and just engaging both. I made clay. I made something with clay once, and it inspired me to become a mother. And
Oh,
I
wow.
didn't expect that at all. And I've done
Yeah.
vision collages the way you or vision boards the way you
Yeah.
mentioned, and it really for somebody who's not visual, I was surprised by that. So I mean, not that I'm not visual. I love color, but I just
Right.
never have thought of myself as an artist. So
Yeah.
I think I want to make sure that everyone who's watching realizes that we're not talking about this a way to become an artist necessarily. It's that we are all artists, and it's a way
Oh,
to
yes, definitely.
express ourselves.
I think there's a way in which sometimes we have this art trauma where somewhere along the line somebody told us that we weren't doing art correctly, or that
Yes.
the art that we were making was wrong, or we made a C in art class or something like that happen, which is so tragic. And then we decided that we weren't artists and we couldn't make art. But when you ask any 3-year-old, are you an artist? They all say yes,
Yes.
and they'll create anything, and they'll like just and I think there's a way in which there's something connected to happiness around this ability to just create and not be so afraid,
Yeah. And the other thing that I think about with art is that there's like when I go to give gifts at a birthday party, bringing art supplies is a great way to give a gift that doesn't feel gendered,
Yeah, definitely,
which so many
definitely.
of the toys in this society feel gendered. And
Yes,
that is one thing that I know, bringing a book or bringing some art supplies is a way to kind of get away from that. So
definitely,
that's,
definitely.
and you
And it's
figure
sad that
every
because
kid's going to love that.
right, some people still though like have this way of like gendering even art supplies, which is really unfortunate. I
Yeah.
don't know where it comes from.
Yeah.
But
Interesting. Yeah.
yeah.
Well, wow, we're already getting close to the end. So do you have a little while to go over for a couple minutes? I have
Yeah,
two more questions
totally.
I really wanted to get
Yeah.
to. So hopefully, if you do have to leave us out there in the audience, come back and watch the last few minutes because these are two really good, juicy questions, and I'll get right to them. And again, I just wanted to make sure everyone knows my guest is DeAnn Acton, who's a licensed marriage and family therapist with a specialty in art therapy. And I am Melita Noël Cantú, your guest, or your host. Oh my goodness. All right, so here we go. This is the question that for me is all about the censorship and celebration tug of war that we have here in this world. And I'm kind of wondering, personally or professionally, what's an example of a time you noticed yourself moving from feeling censored either by yourself or others to being able to celebrate that same thing and look at it through a different lens and really turn it around for yourself?
Right. I think when I think about this question, I'm really wanting to talk about being a parent because I think that that's one of the ways in which that really has happened for me. I think that growing up, I grew up very Catholic, Mexican Catholic, where we had very narrow rules around what gender meant and sexuality and all kinds of other things. And I definitely, a lot of that is inside of me, and it's something that, I've worked really hard to try to figure out, identify it and question it and take it out of me and try to figure out how to kind of deal with it and put it away somewhere so that it doesn't impact the work that I have with the clients that I have and even with my children. So, when I had my children, I really wanted to make sure that things like their toys were always incredibly, they had the whole spectrum of gender was there. So it really allowed for them to be able to kind of express and play with whatever they wanted to. I really wanted to make sure that when I talk about their relationships, that they're never, that I don't assign gender to who it is that they're going to fall in love with either. That's incredibly important to me. Because I want them from a very early age to know that I want them to be whoever they're supposed to be in this world, and I don't know who that is, and I'm really excited about figuring that out.
Yeah.
And so that's been something that has been really cool. And I've also as I through that process, I definitely recognize my own issues that come up. I joke around all the time about how I'll go in to clean my daughter's room and the Barbie dolls are all naked on the floor, and my definite first reaction is I need to put clothes on all of them. And I have to really fight that because I don't want my children to be ashamed of their bodies. I want them to be really excited and happy, and so it's been it's a struggle that I'm definitely working through all this stuff from my own upbringing, and figuring out how to best raise my children so that they are really open and excited and can celebrate who they're supposed to be in the world.
Do you see them responding to that? I mean, do you feel like you're being successful?
Yeah,
with that
definitely.
kind of mindfulness you're bringing to it?
Yes, I do think so. My daughter will draw images all the time of couples, and they're not always men and women, you know,
Mm-hmm.
and I love that, you know, that she's not so much connected to like there's only one way to be in the world. Like that there's this idea that there's many different ways to be, and
Wow.
so you know, that's something that's been really important to me. And you know, and I'm really happy too that you know my own family, even though they may have raised me in a particular way, they've been really open to that as well with my children.
Wow.
And so, you know, that's been really positive.
That's
Yeah.
great.
Yeah.
So you've kind of seen it in both generations, both your elders and in your younger in your
Yeah.
children.
Yeah.
Oh, that's
Yeah. I
fantastic.
have. So it's been really, really good. You know, and we'll see. I mean, imagine the other things will come up as they get older, and you know, because right
Hmm.
now they're still little. You know, and so it'll be interesting to see how I move through those things as well, you know, and
Right.
continue to grow and change. And um, yeah.
Well, it sounds like this leads into my last question, which is, you know, who or what inspires you? And I have a quote that I'll share in a minute, but it sounds just from what I'm hearing, it sounds like you're getting a lot of inspiration from being a parent
Yeah, I
as well
do.
as being an artist. It's kind of like these two things have really shaped you quite a bit.
Yeah, yeah, I
Yeah.
think so. Definitely those two things. And the third thing I think that really has shaped me a lot is just being a therapist. You know, I've been really privileged to hear so many stories, and so many people have shared who they are and their identity and their struggles with identity and their struggles with love and relationship and with trauma and with all these things, and just watching people become resilient and watching people understand who they are is
Yeah.
incredibly inspiring. And you
Oh,
know, I've been doing this now for you know nearly 17 years. It's been very, it's been really kind of life changing to be able to sit with people and bear witness to kind of the things that they've experienced. So you know, definitely, I think that's where my biggest inspiration is. And I think the other piece that's important for me around that is that I take those experiences and that I've had with my clients and their stories. And I'm a firm believer that therapy doesn't stop in the office. So
mm-hmm.
when I'm talking with, for example, you know, a trans youth, and they're telling me about kind of some of the struggles they've had, I take that outside as well. And so that means, you know, if I care very much about this client, I need to make sure that not only am I caring about her within that session, but I'm also doing what I need to do outside of that session to make sure that social justice issues are at the forefront and I'm impacting change in
Mm-hmm.
the world itself. So, so I think that in that way also, I feel very inspired by my clients to like you know continue the work and continue to find ways to live in a world that I want to live in and
Right.
make the changes that I need to make.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, I want to go ahead and share this. Let's see if I can share this quote. Oh, wait, where did it go? Hang on. Can you see the quote here?
Yeah.
Yeah, and it says, "Art washes away from the soul the dust of everyday life," and that's a Pablo Picasso quote, and just fantastic quote. I love
Yeah,
that.
I love that quote. That's a great
Yeah,
quote.
yeah. So, want to can you speak to is he somebody who particularly inspires you, or was it the words, or what
I think
was
it's
it
the
about
words,
that?
but I also, you know, just in his artwork, there's a way in which, you know, he really just kind of like was very playful and just was constantly creating. And there's something about that that's really important. I know as a person, he wasn't always the nicest guy,
Yeah, yeah. I
but I
know that
like.
it's interesting because there is that tension with him. So,
Yeah, yeah, there's
yeah.
not with a lot of artists, unfortunately. But I like the fact that you know there's just this playful way of being able to kind of make art
Hmm.
and not so much the way that he tipped the judgment of art and the idea that you know children are these amazing artists and he really
Mm,
you know he said that one of the worst things was like learning to make art that there was a way in which that really hindered him you know
right.
because as a child you make art in this totally different way it's really just quite amazing. It's when you start trying to learn to make things perfect that things start to become more difficult. And I
Huh.
like that notion, you know. But also just the way he was just so prolific. He made so much art,
Yeah.
and there's something just really inspiring about that. You know.
Yes. No, I agree. And what I'm hearing so much from you today is mindfulness and the sense of flow that comes with being a creative person, and that's something that we really intuitively understand as children and you know really put out into the world, and it gets harder and harder the more we get enculturated almost. And I wonder if there's something to be said about gender and sexuality around that too, that we tend to be able to express ourselves so much more clearly when we're younger, and then we get put into little boxes around gender and sexuality as we get older. And sometimes it's about going back to try to rediscover who we really are. And the therapy sounds like it really helps with that. Oh, I think I have lost DeAnn. Well, I wanted to just thank you, DeAnn, for being with us today. And we are at the end of our show. It always goes so fast. But it's just been a wonderful way to end the 2014 to have you on today. And I think her connection went out a little bit, but thanks to all of you out in the audience for joining us. We really appreciated having the chance to talk with you. And if you have any questions, please feel free to post them in the comments where you RSVP'd. And I will go ahead and say, have a wonderful new year. As always, I hope you get a chance to celebrate all the people in your life as you make choices around how you may personally wish to move from censorship to celebration. And I hope we gave you some good ideas for how to do that. And DeAnn and I will do a little bit of a write-up about that, so you can kind of have them written down so you can take them forward and take them with you into 2015. I have some really exciting guests coming in 2015. We will have 2 episodes in January, I believe, a special episode. And I will be doing more with that soon, so be on the lookout for that. And feel free to sign up for my emails, and you can see that in the About section so that you get reminders when the next shows are coming up. So thanks again for joining me. Have a wonderful rest of your holidays and into the new year. And thanks again to DeAnn Acton for joining me and talking about art therapy. Bye-bye, everyone.